Ethan's phone rang late one evening, shattering the quiet rhythm of his small apartment. The number flashing on the screen was unfamiliar yet hauntingly familiar, Aunt Claire. He hesitated, thumb hovering before answering. Her voice came through soft, trembling, warm in a way that made him pause. "It's been a long time," she said. Almost immediately, another voice joined hers, Aunt Margaret. Calm, deliberate, commanding in that subtle way she always had. "We were hoping you could do something for us," she said. The words were measured, but the meaning felt heavier, almost urgent. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, curiosity sharpening into unease. There was a pause. Claire drew in a breath, slow, gathering courage. "We want you to come spend a week with us. Not as family, not as a duty, but as people who care for you. Maybe people who need you more than you realize." Ethan felt a jolt in his chest. The request was strange, almost shocking. And yet, something in their voices stopped him from laughing or declining. "Tomorrow, if you can," Margaret said. That simple, commanding invitation settled like a stone in his mind. By morning, Ethan had packed a bag and was driving north. The highway stretched endlessly, rain giving way to fleeting patches of sunlight. He told himself it was only a family visit, yet a quiet voice whispered that it was far more than that. The lake house emerged in the afternoon, hidden among towering pines, windows glowing amber against the shadows. Claire greeted him first, rushing out and hugging him tighter than expected, her warmth nearly startling. Margaret appeared behind her, composed, elegant, her hand brushing his arm in a grounding gesture. "Come in. You must be tired," she said, simple words weighted with unspoken meaning. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and fresh bread. Claire fussed over his coat, poured tea, her movements quick and nervous. Margaret sat across, calm, her eyes studying him as though measuring every pulse, every breath. Ethan realized slowly, they weren't treating him like a nephew. They were treating him as someone they wanted to know deeply, someone they had chosen. The conversation drifted through old memories, confessions of regret, and the loneliness of lives carefully constructed but quietly aching. Claire's laughter was bright but carried hidden sadness. Margaret's words landed deliberately, like stones in water, rippling quietly, firmly, but impossible to ignore. A brush of Claire's hand against his while refilling his cup made his chest tighten. Margaret noticed, her lips pressing into a line, silent acknowledgement. Heart hammering, Ethan excused himself to the guest room, leaning back against the door, trying to understand the strange gravity of their presence. He couldn't sleep. The firelight, the confessions, the subtle intensity of both women's gazes played on repeat in his mind. The next morning, silver mist crept over the lake. Ethan stood at the window, restless. For a fleeting moment, he thought of leaving, driving away, pretending none of this had happened. But before the thought could solidify, Claire appeared, casual yet deliberate, hair loose around her shoulders, a thick sweater draped over her frame. "Come with us," she said softly. "We're going for a walk." Margaret waited outside, calm, steady, her presence heavier than the morning air. They walked along the lakeside path, silence broken only by the soft crunch of damp leaves beneath their feet. Claire linked her arm through his, leaning lightly on his shoulder at times, warm and disarming. Margaret followed just behind, her gaze steady, her presence quietly insistent. Claire broke the silence first, laughing softly. "When we were younger, Margaret and I used to imagine moments like this. Not with you, of course, not yet, but with someone who could make the world feel less lonely." Margaret's voice followed, calm, deliberate. "That's why we asked you here, Ethan. We wanted something real, someone to share the silence with, someone who sees us as we truly are." The words pressed on him like gravity. Claire leaned closer, head brushing his shoulder, hair warm against his cheek. "Stay with us," she whispered. Margaret sat nearby, her presence radiating warmth without touch. "We're not asking you to choose," she said. "We're asking you to see us and let yourself be seen." The pull was undeniable. Claire's warmth, Margaret's calm intensity, they drew him in, but not with coercion, with honesty. For the first time in years, he felt wanted not as a nephew, not as family duty, but for himself. Fear pressed at the edges of his thoughts, yet he couldn't leave. Whatever unfolded this week, he realized, would change everything. And in that quiet, silver mist morning, Ethan understood. Nothing would ever be simple again. That evening, the lake house seemed to hum with quiet expectation. Ethan lingered in the living room, the fire casting long, flickering shadows across the polished wooden floors. Claire sat on the couch, her posture relaxed but deliberate, knees tucked beneath her, eyes occasionally lifting to meet his. Margaret remained in her chair, a silent presence whose gaze could pierce through walls and defenses. Every glance from her carried weight, measured and intentional, like she was cataloging his responses, reading him in ways no one ever had. Ethan felt simultaneously exposed and protected. The air was thick with unsaid words, with an almost tangible gravity that made him lean forward, almost instinctively seeking clarity, yet terrified of what he might find. Claire leaned closer, brushing his hand as she reached for her wine. The touch was light, fleeting, but deliberate enough to send a shiver up his spine. Margaret's eyes lingered, unwavering, as if she understood the complexity of the moment better than he did. "You're quiet tonight," Claire said softly, her voice carrying a note of worry. "Do we frighten you?" I don't understand," Ethan admitted, his voice betraying a tremor he couldn't hide. "That's because we haven't told you everything," Margaret said, low and steady. "We wanted you here for reasons more than company, more than family visits. There's something we've been holding back, and maybe it's time to share it." Ethan's stomach twisted, an uneasy mix of curiosity, fear, and anticipation. He felt trapped in the gravity of their presence, unable to leave, unable to look away. Claire's head tilted, a faint smile brushing her lips, though her eyes shimmered with vulnerability. "We've been living in quiet," she whispered. "Hiding, waiting for someone to truly see us, not as sisters, not as aunts, but as people." Margaret's nod was slow, deliberate, carrying more weight than any words could. "We're tired of roles," she said. "We're tired of masks. We don't want to live in silence anymore. We want something real, even if it scares us, even if it's forbidden." Ethan's heart thumped violently, each beat echoing in his chest. The line between family and something else blurred in the firelight. He wanted to speak, to find a rational anchor, but words failed him. Instead, he reached instinctively, resting his hand lightly on Margaret's clasped fingers. The touch lingered, intimate but tentative. She looked at him, and he saw gratitude, longing, maybe something more, a mirror of the emotion Claire had already revealed. Claire moved closer, sliding her shoulder against his. "Stay," she whispered, the single word heavy with invitation and unspoken promise. Margaret leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "See us, don't hide from this." Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't family. Not in the way he had understood. It was deeper, sharper, intoxicatingly dangerous. Yet the fear, the anxiety, only amplified a longing he didn't fully recognize. The pull was undeniable. Claire's warmth, deliberate and familiar, Margaret's steady presence, protective yet insistent, they framed him in a reality he had never known existed. Hours passed in subtle gestures and fragmented conversation. Claire's laughter rang softly, carrying a tension that belied her joy. Margaret spoke rarely, but each word landed with precision, carefully measured to stir, to provoke reflection, to open something within him. When the fire dimmed, Ethan excused himself to the guest room. Alone, he tried to untangle the chaos of his thoughts. Every recollection of the evening pressed on him, the warmth of Claire's touch, the intensity of Margaret's gaze, the weight of their confessions. He realized he hadn't just been invited to a family visit. He had been invited into their inner world, a space intimate, dangerous, and utterly consuming. Sleep eluded him. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments over and over. Claire's laughter, bright and almost wistful. Margaret's eyes, calm but probing, searching for something he hadn't yet acknowledged in himself. The sensation was magnetic and terrifying. Every nerve in his body hummed with awareness. The week ahead promised more closeness, more confessions, more of this uncharted emotional territory that tugged relentlessly at him. By morning, the lake was bathed in soft silver mist. Ethan awoke restless, unsettled, haunted by thoughts he couldn't name. The house was quiet. Claire appeared first, brushing her hair back, loose and unrestrained, a sweater draped casually over her shoulders. "Come with us," she said softly. "We're going for a walk." Margaret was already outside, coat buttoned, hands tucked in her pockets, the morning light softening the edges of her usual formality. Along the lakeside path, silence dominated, punctuated by the crunch of leaves underfoot. Claire linked her arm through his, her nearness warm, grounding, yet electric in a way that left him conscious of every movement. Margaret walked behind, her presence quiet but palpable, eyes often on him, steady and unwavering, a protective gravity that drew him forward. "You know," Claire said, her voice gentle, carrying a hint of nostalgia, We used to dream of moments like this. Not with you, not yet, but with someone who could make us feel seen. Not as a sister, not as an aunt, just seen. Margaret's voice, quiet but clear, added weight. That's why we asked you here. We didn't want another holiday of smiles and distance. We wanted truth, honesty, someone to share silence with, someone to truly witness us. Ethan slowed, his heart heavy and fast. The pull was undeniable. Claire's warmth, playful yet aching. Margaret's steadiness, profound and unshakable. Together, they formed a gravity he could not resist. For the first time, he felt wanted, not as a relative, not as family duty, but for himself. And yet, fear lingered at the edges, a cautionary whisper he could not ignore. The lake shimmered quietly beside them, mist curling around their forms, as if the world had contracted to only their presence. Ethan understood with sudden clarity. Nothing about this week would be ordinary, nothing about these women would be ordinary, and nothing about himself would remain the same. The afternoon settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind of silence that holds space for truths too heavy to speak aloud. Ethan wandered through the lake house, aimless but unable to pull his thoughts away from the tension that had begun to wrap itself around him like smoke. Claire had retreated to the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared tea, her movements casual but every gesture deliberate. Margaret remained in the living room, her posture upright, gaze sharp yet unreadable, observing him as he drifted near the windows, watching the lake ripple under the pale sun. The house was warm, the scent of fresh bread and lavender lingering in the air, almost comforting. Yet the warmth only heightened his awareness of the undercurrent, the electric tension between the three of them. Claire called to him, soft but insistent. "Ethan, sit. Don't just stand there. Come be with us." He hesitated before crossing the room, drawn by her voice, her nearness, and something unspoken that tugged at him relentlessly. When he reached the couch, Claire shifted to make room, her knee brushing against his as she leaned slightly forward, eyes shining with a mixture of curiosity and vulnerability. "Tell us," she said, voice trembling almost imperceptibly. "What's been haunting you? What's in your chest that you've carried alone?" Ethan swallowed, words catching in his throat. No one had ever asked him that, not with this kind of intimacy, not with such raw expectation. He opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing he had no words that would capture the complexity of what he felt. Instead, he looked at Claire, then Margaret, and let his silence speak. Margaret leaned slightly forward from her chair, voice calm, authoritative, yet intimate in its clarity. "Silence is honest too," she said. "But you need to understand, we are not asking for easy answers. We want you to feel, to explore. We want to offer you something rare, a space where your honesty is safe, where your heart can speak without judgment." The words pressed against him like the weight of water, heavy and enveloping. He felt the pull, the simultaneous fear and yearning that had been building since he arrived. He thought of Claire's soft laughter, her delicate touch brushing against his hand when refilling the wine glass. He thought of Margaret's intensity, the way her eyes followed him, dissecting and embracing him in the same glance. Claire reached out suddenly, her fingers brushing his arm lightly. "Don't run from this," she said softly. "We've waited too long for something real, something honest. We want to give it to you, and you, if you allow it, to give back." Her nearness was intoxicating, grounding, and disorienting all at once. Ethan's breath caught. He wanted to retreat, to find solid ground, but every instinct in him rebelled. He couldn't leave, not yet. Margaret's gaze met his, unwavering, deliberate. "You feel it too," she said. "The tension, the pull, don't pretend it's not here. It exists whether you acknowledge it or not, and denying it will only make it stronger." Ethan's hands trembled as he pressed them against his knees, feeling the pulse of his heartbeat echoing through the silence. The air in the room thickened, charged with an intensity he had never experienced. Claire leaned closer, head tilting slightly, her hair brushing his shoulder. The scent of her perfume, faint but distinct, made his stomach twist. Margaret's presence at his side was steady, grounding, yet equally magnetic. He felt trapped, consumed, and exposed, and yet the desire to stay, to lean in, to let himself be drawn into this forbidden orbit was overwhelming. Hours passed like this, moments stretching, silence punctuated by soft confessions. Claire spoke of longing, of nights spent wishing for connection, for someone who could see her without pretense. Margaret revealed vulnerabilities rarely shared with anyone, the fear of fading into irrelevance, the quiet ache of loneliness that had persisted despite a lifetime of careful control. Ethan listened, chest tightening with each revelation, feeling as though the walls he had built around himself were crumbling. Eventually, the conversation turned toward him, not probing, not intrusive, but patient, deliberate. "We want to know you," Claire said gently. "Not the nephew, not the boy from years ago, but you, the parts you hide even from yourself, the ones you carry quietly because no one has asked for them." Margaret nodded, voice calm but insistent. "We are offering you the truth, Ethan, a space to step into it, to live it, to breathe it. And if you do, you will find there's no turning back. Not from us, not from yourself." The gravity of their words pressed against him until he felt he could barely breathe. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape the intensity that was closing in. Yet he was rooted, unable to move, consumed by a mixture of fear, desire, and the haunting beauty of honesty laid bare before him. Claire reached out again, hand brushing his, lingering just long enough to speak volumes. Margaret leaned slightly forward, her gaze unwavering, her presence a quiet insistence that anchored him even as it drew him in. Ethan realized, with both dread and longing, that he was standing on the edge of something irreversible. This week, these moments, these women, they had shattered the boundaries of what he thought was acceptable, safe, or imaginable. And yet, within the fracture, there was a dangerous, intoxicating clarity. He wanted to be here. Not out of duty, not out of obligation, but because the pull, the connection, the raw honesty was too powerful to resist. By nightfall, the lake house had become a cocoon of firelight, warmth, and tension. Claire rested her head lightly on his shoulder as he sat, every small touch deliberate, intimate, and electrifying. Margaret remained nearby, silent but fully present, a steadying force whose very presence reinforced the impossible truth. The moment they were sharing was extraordinary, delicate, and utterly consuming. Ethan understood, more deeply than ever, that he was no longer merely a visitor in this house. He was a participant in something raw, forbidden, and beautiful, a truth that would follow him far beyond the confines of this lake, beyond the firelight, beyond the fragile security of silence. And for the first time in years, he wanted it. Night had fallen over the lake house, and the world outside the windows seemed distant, muted, as if it existed in another reality. Inside, the fire cast flickering shadows, painting the walls with gold and amber tones, and Ethan sat between Claire and Margaret, his body tense, yet drawn inexorably toward them. The silence had shifted, not uncomfortable anymore, but weighted with expectation, with unspoken desire, and a strange kind of intimacy he had never experienced before. Claire leaned into him, her head brushing his shoulder, her breath faint against his ear. "We've waited for this for so long," she whispered, her voice trembling with something between hope and fear. "Not just for you, Ethan. For this, honesty, connection, understanding. Someone who sees us as we are, not what the world wants us to be." Margaret remained across from them, her fingers laced in her lap, eyes unblinking. She was calm, almost statuesque, but the intensity in her gaze made Ethan's heart race. "We aren't asking you to define anything tonight," she said softly. "We only ask that you feel, that you allow yourself to see us, to let yourself be seen, nothing more complicated than that." Ethan's hands were shaking. He wanted to leave, wanted to retreat to the safety of his guest room, away from the magnetic pull of their presence. And yet, every fiber of his being was tethered to them: Claire's warmth, Margaret's steady intensity, the impossible intimacy of being understood without explanation. He swallowed, heart hammering, and realized he had never been this visible, this known, in his entire life. Claire shifted, lifting her hand to rest lightly on his. The touch was electric, deliberate, and careful. "Do you feel it too?" she asked softly, eyes searching his face. "The pull between us, the tension you can't deny." Ethan's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His silence was an answer. And in that silence, the room seemed to grow smaller, the firelight warmer, the air thick with anticipation. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her presence suddenly closer, though she didn't touch him. "It's real," she said, voice low. "This isn't imagined. It's here between us, and it's undeniable. You don't have to act on it, you only have to acknowledge it." The truth of her words struck him with both awe and terror. He had felt lonely for years, unmoored, unseen, drifting through life with a sense that no one could ever truly reach him. And now, in this quiet house by the lake, with two women he had barely known yet somehow always understood him, he felt seen, known, and desired. The sensation was intoxicating, dangerous, and utterly overwhelming. Claire's hand moved slightly, brushing his again, this time with more insistence, more intimacy. "Stay with us tonight," she murmured. "Sit with the truth. Sit with me. Don't run from what's here." Ethan's body betrayed him. He wanted to pull away, to argue, to insist that this was wrong, impossible, forbidden. But the pull was too strong, the honesty too rare, the longing too consuming. He stayed, letting the warmth of Claire's hand and the steady gravity of Margaret's gaze anchor him, though he could feel the storm of emotion rising inside. Margaret finally moved, rising from her chair with a slow, deliberate grace. She came to sit opposite Ethan, closer than before, her hands resting on her knees, eyes locking with his in a gaze that was both commanding and tender. "No one has ever given us this," she said quietly. "No one has ever offered us the chance to be honest, to be vulnerable, to be wanted for who we are. And now, here you are. You can step away if you need to, or you can step in. The choice is yours, but the moment, the truth, is ours to share." The fire crackled, shadows dancing across the walls, and Ethan felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. Everything he had believed about family, desire, and loyalty had fractured in the last 48 hours. He realized, with an almost painful clarity, that he was not merely a visitor in this house. He was a participant in a dynamic that would change him forever. Claire shifted again, her body brushing against his arm, her warmth spreading through him in ways that made him shiver. "Don't think about what's right or wrong," she whispered. "Think about what feels real. Think about what makes your chest ache with something you've been missing your entire life." Ethan's thoughts spun. What they were asking defied everything he had known about boundaries, family, and propriety. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt alive in a way he never had, seen, understood, and desired. The firelight reflected in Claire's eyes, in Margaret's steady gaze, and he felt pulled into the impossible orbit of both their presences. The night stretched, every moment laden with quiet confessions, fleeting touches, and shared glances that spoke volumes without words. Ethan realized that this week, this house, these women, they had pulled him into a reality he could not escape, a truth he could not deny. And though fear pressed at the edges of his mind, desire and longing anchored him, compelling him to stay, to feel, to surrender to the moment. By the time the clock struck midnight, Ethan had made a silent decision. He didn't know what would happen next, what boundaries would be crossed, or what consequences awaited. All he knew was that he could no longer deny the pull, the intimacy, the raw honesty that had drawn him into this forbidden, consuming connection. The lake house, the firelight, Claire's warmth, and Margaret's steady gaze, it was a world he had stumbled into, and one he could no longer turn away from. The night deepened, and Ethan remained between them, trembling, aware of the impossibility of the situation, yet unable to move. Claire's hand remained lightly on his, Margaret's gaze unrelenting but tender, and he understood with a clarity both thrilling and terrifying that nothing, no past, no rules, no fears, could undo the truth they had all uncovered together. The following morning, the lake lay still, a mirror of the sky above, undisturbed by wind or bird or ripple. Ethan woke to the faint smell of coffee and the soft rustle of movement. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind like a fevered dream, Claire's warmth, Margaret's unwavering gaze, the unspoken confessions, the raw honesty, the forbidden intimacy that now felt permanent in his memory. He rose cautiously, not wanting to wake them prematurely, but the front room was already alive with quiet sounds. Claire humming softly while she arranged breakfast, Margaret moving with deliberate care around the kitchen. Both looked up as he entered, smiles faint but sincere, eyes reflecting an intimacy that terrified and thrilled him simultaneously. "You slept well?" Claire asked, her voice light, but underneath something deeper lingered, a question, a challenge, a plea. Ethan nodded, unsure what to say, caught between desire, guilt, and a strange sense of belonging he had never known before. Margaret gestured toward the table. "Sit. Eat. We'll talk after," she said calmly, commanding without pressure. The meal was quiet, the conversation measured. Words were chosen carefully, glances exchanged with meaning that only the three of them could interpret. Claire reached over to brush Ethan's hand with hers as she passed him the plate of eggs, a casual touch that made his chest tighten. Margaret's presence loomed in contrast, steady, grounding, almost invisible in motion, yet impossible to ignore. It was as though they existed on two separate axes. Claire, a whirlwind of warmth and unpredictability. Margaret, the gravity that kept him tethered. After breakfast, Claire suggested a walk by the lake, her tone lighter than the night before, yet the tension remained, taut as a string ready to snap. Ethan followed, heart pounding, aware that every step brought him closer to truths he was unprepared for, yet unable to resist. The mist rolled over the water, wrapping them in a cocoon of silver gray, a world apart from any outside expectations. Claire spoke first, her voice softer now, vulnerable. "Last night it was real. We've never done this before, not like this, not together, not with someone who understands. But we did, Ethan, and it changed something." She paused, searching his eyes for comprehension, for acceptance. Margaret joined in, her calm voice carrying weight. "We asked for honesty, for connection. We didn't ask for comfort or absolution. But what we got, what we shared, is undeniable. It exists, whether you acknowledge it or not." Ethan's thoughts spiraled. What they were asking wasn't simple. It defied everything he knew about boundaries, morality, family, and desire. Yet, the temptation, the longing, the rare vulnerability they offered, it was magnetic, impossible to resist. His own heart betrayed him, pounding against his chest, betraying both fear and longing. Claire leaned in close, her shoulder brushing his. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly. "This tension, this pull?" Ethan swallowed hard. The answer was inescapable. I can't deny it," he admitted, voice trembling. Margaret stepped closer, finally bridging the space he had been avoiding, her gaze locked on his. "Then don't," she said simply. "Don't fight it. Don't run, feel it. Understand it. Let yourself live in the truth of this moment." Time seemed to stop. The lake stretched endlessly before them, the mist thick around their feet, their presence binding him in ways he could neither rationalize nor escape. For hours, they walked, spoke, touched lightly, each gesture laden with meaning. Every confession, every shared glance, every brush of skin across skin deepened the bond, heightened the tension, and tore down the last vestiges of his restraint. By evening, they returned to the house. Ethan sat on the couch, Claire on one side, Margaret on the other, the fire crackling between them. Words were minimal, looks carried volumes. Claire's hand found his again, this time deliberate, firm, her warmth anchoring him in a world that seemed both forbidden and sacred. Margaret's eyes never left him, silent but commanding, her steady presence as intoxicating as any touch. "I never imagined it could be like this," Ethan whispered, voice breaking under the weight of longing, fear, and awe. "I never thought I could feel this." Claire leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Neither did we," she admitted, "but it is, and we can't deny it." Margaret reached out then, her hand brushing his other, completing the circle, completing the moment. "All that matters now," she said quietly, "is what we choose, together or apart, but honest always." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the warmth, the gravity, the dangerous thrill of the impossible. He realized finally that this week, these women, the lake house, and every intimate, unspoken confession, they had shattered everything he thought he knew. And in that shattering, he had found something he never expected: freedom, desire, and an impossible connection that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The fire burned low, the night deepened, and Ethan remained between them, aware that the week had changed him irrevocably. There was no turning back, no pretending, no retreat. He had stepped into a truth so raw, so consuming, so dangerous that it would follow him beyond the lake house, beyond family titles, beyond the world he had known. For the first time in years, he was fully seen, fully wanted, fully alive. And he would never be the same again.